Hi, all. Welcome back. We're going to start talking about the cardiovascular system. And so we're going to basically combine the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system together because they're highly related to each other. And one really can't function without the other. So often we'll talk about both cardiovascular and respiratory system kind of collectively. Okay, but we're going to start off talking about the heart. All right, so let's just general kind of what is the cardiovascular system? Okay, it's the heart and the blood vessels that are associated with it. Most of you know that the heart is a relatively large muscle, and its function is pump. It's a functional pump, so it pumps both deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood. It can pump blood that's carrying waste out of the body, nutrients to regions that need it. Okay, it's really the controller of the cardiovascular system, along with the vessels that have to carry the blood, and that can be arteries, veins, capillaries, and intermediates of those. Okay, and we'll cover these here in a few minutes. So the blood vessels, okay, they transport blood through the body, and we've already talked about what blood is. Remember, we're not just talking about red blood cells, we're talking about white blood cells, platelets, plasma, red blood cells, etc. Often we talk about just red blood cells in the cardiovascular system because this is the system that really the connection between that and the respiratory system is where red blood cells get loaded with oxygen and where they get rid of carbon dioxide. Okay. In general, it's better to learn what direction arteries and veins travel than to learn like whether or not they're carrying oxygenated blood, or what color they are on a model or on a diagram. Okay, arteries transport blood away from the heart, regardless of whether it's oxygenated or non-oxygenated. Most of the time it's oxygenated. Okay, veins transport blood toward the heart. Most of the time this is deoxygenated blood. Okay, capillaries is really the connection between arteries and veins, and it allows for that transfer of nutrients, oxygen, waste to be exchanged. So capillaries happen at the cellular level where material is being kind of deposited in cells that need either oxygen or nutrients, need to get rid of waste. It's happening at that level, and that's really where the transfer of blood is occurring between artery and vein, is through the capillaries. So here you can see kind of that cardiovascular system along with the respiratory system. So the lungs on each side. You have your pulmonary trunk. This is going to be moving from the right ventricle to the lungs. These are arteries. They're moving away from the heart, carrying deoxygenated blood that is saturated with carbon dioxide, waste, to the lungs. Okay, in the lungs, and we'll cover what's going on, but in the lungs, carbon dioxide is removed, okay, from the blood through diffusion. Oxygen enters the blood through diffusion, okay, and then the oxygenated blood returns to the heart. Okay, in this case, the left atrium first, then the left ventricle. Left ventricle then sends the blood through the aorta, okay, and then that goes to different tissues in different regions of the body. And we'll cover, what regions might be covered by each. Okay, but that's the general premise. When it gets to the tissue, again, like I said before, these tissues need oxygen for cellular respiration. Part of that cellular respiration is breaking down things like carbohydrates and proteins and lipids, and sometimes you get waste products, sometimes you get nitrogen buildup when you're breaking down amino acids, sometimes you get um, carbon dioxide buildup when you're breaking down glucose and fats. And so that would be transferred back into the blood through the capillary beds and then returned to the heart. And so then it can be deposited or exhaled or removed from the body, either through the lungs, or this blood would travel to the kidneys, and then it can be excreted out through waste products that way. And we'll get into the functions of the kidney, the liver, the digestive systems at a later date. All right, let's talk a little more about kind of the anatomy of the heart. Most of you have experienced the anatomy of the heart in labs, so you know the different chambers, you know the different valves. We'll talk about them, but I'm not going to cover them in great detail because we've already done it in lab. But the one thing that is often not really prevalent in lab is the pericardium or the pericardial sac. Okay, this is the connective tissue, the covering that goes over the heart and the kind of proximal ends of large blood vessels. Okay, there are a few different portions of pericardium. Okay, you have the fibrous pericardium. Okay, that's the outer layer. And we'll talk about kind of the purpose, but that purpose is really protection. It's got lots of connective fibers. It's kind of difficult to tear through, that kind of thing. Okay. Then you have the parietal pericardium. Okay, and that's fibrous also. And then you have the visceral pericardium. That's a little thinner. Okay, and that attaches to the surface of the heart. Okay, and between those is what we call the pericardial cavity. Okay? And there is a fluid that tends to sit in that pericardial cavity. And that allows for the heart, when the heart contracts and relaxes, when the muscle fibers are moving, that heart needs to be able to flex in a kind of a sac that needs to be able to move with it. So it's not rigid and holding it in place, but it has this ability to move back and forth. Some complications that we see in individuals is when you get too much fluid built up in the pericardial cavity. Sometimes this is due to infections and other things that might happen. Then, or when you have like your heart muscles, maybe there's damage to the heart and it's starting to deteriorate and white blood cells are starting to consume that material. Maybe you got basophils that are moving to the region and attracting a lot of fluid to move to the region, and you get this buildup of fluid in the pericardial cavity. That doesn't allow the heart to move as much, and you'll see that it decreases heart function, and sometimes a pericardial centesis needs to occur, and so that's when you draw that fluid off, and so it's removed and taken away, and hopefully the heart can go back to its normal function. So here you can just kind of see that pericardial sac. Okay, so you have that fibrous pericardium on the outside, parietal pericardium, visceral pericardium that's attached to the heart muscle. Okay, and then you have this pericardial cavity. That's where that fluid can build up. If you have heart muscle damage, myocardial damage, a lot of times fluid will leak in there. You could have bacterial infections that occur in regions, viral infections that occur, and you can get fluid that builds up in this sac. And then the heart doesn't have the ability to flex as much and move around. So pretty important, not just for protection, but also for the ability to flex, move, and not be so stationary, okay, when it comes to um, flexibility in the chest cavity. All right, the walls of the heart, three main distinguished layers. Okay, you have the epicardium. Okay, and most of you know that's epi is outer. Okay, so epidermis, epicardium, it's the outer layer. Okay, in this case, it tends to be fairly thin, and it is what's associated with the pericardium. Okay, and so normally or sometimes it's called the visceral pericardium. Okay, and that really reduces friction that's occurring around the heart. The myocardium, this is the workhouse of the heart. Okay, this is where the majority of large, thick muscle fibers occur, and this is what's giving and creating a lot of the force, the pressure that's needed to pump blood from your heart to your toes. And so lots of muscle and we often will distinguish kind of the functionality of the heart by how thick the myocardium is in different regions. So if you have myocardial issues, it might be that you have a thinning of the myocardium, which means that it decreases the force that the heart can produce. And endocardium, again, this is another thin layer, endo meaning inner, okay, and this is another layer that really just protects and kind of coats the inside of the heart chamber to make it less friction there too. Okay, so you got all this fluid that you want to be able to move freely, and so you don't want to build up friction and things like that to reduce the pressure or increase the pressure needed. So here you can just see a cross section of it. So you get that pericardium, parietal cavity, okay, endocardium, okay, and then your myocardial, lots of muscle fibers, big, thick muscle fibers. The thickness depends on what region of the heart we're talking about and the amount of force that's needed to be generated. Okay, so the left ventricle needs a lot of force, so it has a very thick myocardium. And then that endocardium, again, it's a thin layer that's kind of protective and reduces friction. So when we're looking at kind of the overall structure of the heart, we've talked about this before, okay? 4 chambers. You have the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart. When we're talking about the right side of the heart, we're often talking about dealing with deoxygenated blood. And when we're talking about the left side of the heart, we're talking about dealing with oxygenated blood. What this picture is showing you is just the left side of the heart and how the different valves are controlled when materials coming into the heart and leaving the heart. So when the pulmonary veins, when the blood is coming back from the lungs after it's been oxygenated, it will enter the left atrium. Okay. And at that time, often the mitral valve will actually be closed, okay, prior to contraction. Once the left atrium contracts, and we'll get into how this works and what's controlling that, okay, once it contracts, the mitral valve opens, or what we sometimes call the bicuspid valve. Okay, it opens, it allows the blood to move from the left atrium into the left ventricle. In the left ventricle, it will pool or enter the left ventricle, and you'll have loads, so you have a bunch of blood that comes in. It can't leave because that semilunar valve, which we call the aortic valve or the aortic semilunar valve, is actually closed. Okay? And then Once you have enough fluid, enough blood that is built up in the ventricle, the bicuspid or the mitral valve will close. The ventricle, the left ventricle will it will contract, and the muscle fibers will fire, and so there will be an electric pulse that causes the muscles to contract, and then the blood will be forced out. When that occurs, okay, that semilunar valve, that aortic valve, will open, so the blood can only go out the aorta. Okay? It can't flow back into the left atrium. Okay? And so these valves are really preventing blood from trickling out, okay, or reversing and going backwards in the system. Okay, so the valves really control the flow of blood. Now the force is generated by the myocardium of that region. Okay, and just to recap kind of the whole system, so the right atrium over here, okay, is going to receive blood from the body, okay? And sometimes we call it deoxygenated, but a better term for it is actually oxygen poor blood, because it is quite possible, and quite often this is the case, that the blood that's in the atria or atrium has oxygen. Okay? And if you call it deoxygenated, you might think that there's no oxygen in it, but it often does have oxygen. It's just poor oxygen level, high carbon dioxide level, poor oxygen level. Well, it's coming back either from the inferior vena cava, okay, or the superior vena cava. It will enter the right atrium. Once in the right atrium, okay, the right atrium, and at the same time, or close to the same time, the left atrium will fire. They will contract, okay? And we'll talk about the node that is involved in this and the electrical current that is sent to do this, okay? But at any rate, that will contract both atria, okay? That then will move the blood, okay? In this case, poor oxygenated blood will move in to the right ventricle. Oxygenated blood would move in to the left ventricle. Okay, so that poor oxygenated blood moves into the right ventricle. Then, once the atrium relax, the ventricle contracts, okay, and the ventricle will contract and force the blood out of the heart. From the right side, that blood will move through the pulmonary trunk. Okay, this is a artery, okay, because it's moving blood out of the body. The vena cava, inferior and superior, are veins. They move blood into the heart. Okay, so pulmonary artery will take the blood away, either to the left lung, well, to both the left lung and the right lung. Okay, the blood will then become oxygen rich in the lungs and return via pulmonary veins. Okay, these pulmonary veins, the left pulmonary veins, the right pulmonary veins, they both dump into the left atrium. Okay, that blood will pool in the left atrium, be forced into the left ventricle, out of the left ventricle, into the aorta, and back out into the body in different directions. Okay. We've talked about this quite a bit in lab. So just be able to, go through these methods and really know what the flow of blood is. That's very important because when we talk about complications, we might talk about the mitral valve failing, or a semilunar valve failing, or something like that, or a clot that forms in the pulmonary trunk. And we'll need to know like what would occur, what you think would occur, where's the blood going to pool, where's the blood going to flow back into, these kind of things. Okay, and that really brings us to two kind of distinctions. We call it the systemic circuit and the pulmonary circuit. Okay, the systemic circuit really starts in the left ventricle, and this is the circuit of taking blood to the body, okay, to different regions of the body, and it returning to the heart. So taking oxygenated blood from the left ventricle, the aortic valve through the aortic valve or the aortic semilunar valve to the aorta, into capillaries in many different regions of the body, okay, back through the superior cornice, the vena cava, back to the right atrium. Okay, so systemic circuit is from left ventricle to right atrium. Pulmonary circuit is really from the right ventricle to the left atrium. Okay? And so it's going to take that poorly oxygenated blood, take it to the lungs, back to the heart, okay, and then out of the heart through the left ventricle. All right, now, one of the key components, one of the important pieces that we often forget about and often might see complications, especially when you have myocardial complications, when the heart might have damage or cells are not getting enough oxygen. Sometimes you'll have blockages that occur in the coronary arteries. Okay? So coming out of the left ventricle, up the aortic trunk, okay, there is the aortic semilunar valve, okay, and just past, right next to the semilunar valve, you're going to have both the coronary arteries, okay, the right and the left. These are what feed, okay, or supply the heart with oxygenated blood. So these are really the first arteries that are going to get that oxygenated blood and be able to supply. And of course, we need to supply the thing that's doing all the pumping first. And so this is where the heart's getting its blood. Main supply of blood is from the coronary arteries. And so when we see issues with maybe a blood clot or maybe some blockage, sometimes it's a coronary artery that is blocked that causes a heart attack. Okay, and so might put a stent in a coronary artery or something like that, so blood can still make it to the heart and supply it with the oxygen and nutrients that it needs. Okay, and then the remainder of the blood would move up the aortic arch and out to the different regions of the body. Okay, next time we'll just spend time talking a little bit more about heart function, like what determines how your heart rate works and the pressure of your heart, etc., in the next video.